Sing the way. Samba go the way, Naki go the way.
Gogudu, Yabu Gogudu.
Oh, yeah. Juran didn't try Yabu the way.
Getting out inside.
Oh, yeah. Lasso, any that ring of Yancher. Any Tati Julam Tony. Any Medicine that Chinchini Yam the Sijuka Kawazambo and it be Kawason to Chinan Samala.
Feel very fortunate to be here again with all of you. Thank you so much. To continue on with our Saturday instructions.
The ring of Shutu to body. Then is Chadi. They did rely on any. Najajudang Marazawa Lama and Jupa Lama. Asobala Soatam, the order to command instead.
This will be our sixth session of these instructions, and as usual, I'll begin with the beseeching the root and lineage gurus and so on.
Sanje tam je je ngo re dan je guru jam zi chab da e ga ding som ba mi be ban go en de je la ma dam be jab je de de ma mi ba la ngo be ra de de ku be san za ji je sen ji o ju sen je la ba ran ze de so nin je jin bo zu de ni me de su ne mo lan jin bo ngap ja da be ga dang an sin de sen me do tun ba tu je jin lang gu san sa ni do jin be ba ya li man de a lo de jin be je ge de ni se zhe ba jin be je de jiang lo za jin be xiao la so wan de nim de din be gu da zhe ne je ga bie jin be la ma ni ba ren ze de jin be de be jan tin ze re ba jin be xiao la so wan de te ba jin be ren qiao yong so se sa jia jin be do bang de je ren zhe le jin bong ga da nyam ba da ning gom jin be xiao la so wan de xi zhen ga la ji la jian guo le jian ze be dong de ze le na bo jia le din ba gu ne san ze be ga ju ren bo ji lang ge san sa Jampa Tharchin ala wan ju xie lo zhi ben zang yi xie de zi dang di ji jam so ro zong zi bei ji pan ju xiao na bei mo rang gu san Wat di zawa la ma rinpoche da ge jie war bei me di xiong la ga din qin bei go ne ji zong de gu song tu ji ngu zhe za de so yong di san jie gong da nyam na yang ga din san jie gong ya la ben go la me xiao la so wan de da song zhou ge long na ju se chang ma da so jie dong gen ji di na de xie hong ma je ba gong se da de de be ji jian qian be ji sim ba de ba tam qian de xie xie na mo ya dam ba la ye ge da le da ne jin ge zhen da da me ge nam da zhuo wa gong jie da ge ji zang ba tam ji ge de da ge ju di bo Majun Roa Nankan Tada Nyambe Simji Tamji, Sije Dohan Tada Le Darte, Nando Tinja Deva, Lana Miba Yanda Bazoba Sanje, Comparambochi, Nijine Jan Tobarsa. Ate Chida Dambechu Samondini, Chujin the Sine, Nyamsa Lambar Gio, Nyambagone, Sinsar.
O benevolent root guru, who is in essence all Buddhas of the past, present, and future, with great devotion I prostrate to you and go for refuge to you with my body, speech, and mind. Please grant your blessings to be cared for by you inseparably in this lifetime and all of my future lives. Clean ground of pure ethical discipline, beautified by mountains of unfathomable samadhi, illuminating all things with wisdom light of the sun and moon, Supreme Buddha who accomplishes the welfare of all, please bestow virtue and goodness. The mandala expanding throughout space in knowledge of all things, beautiful thousand-fold light striking the lands of trainees, fully illuminating all of Buddha's teachings in their entirety, With devotion, I prostrate to the great jewel of the Kagyu. O glorious and precious root guru, please take seat of lotus at my heart. Caring for me in your great kindness, please grant attainments of body, speech, and mind. Equal to all Buddhas in qualities of realization, yet surpassing all Buddhas in kindness to me, I pray at the feet of my root guru, O protector, please turn the minds of myself and all beings towards the Dharma. All you who have become disciples of the Sagatas, those gone to bliss throughout the billions of worlds of the 10 directions, all of you who wish to hear the Dharma raining down here and now, may you come here. Namo, in languages of devas, nagas, and yakshas, languages of kumbhandas and human beings, and the sounds of whatever beings exist. In every language, I shall teach the Dharma. Please listen well with the motivation of bodhicitta, thinking all mother sentient beings equal to the extent of space must by all means attain unexcelled eternal bliss of perfect complete enlightenment. To accomplish this, I shall listen carefully without distraction to the Mahayana teachings being given here and put them into practice.
다들 간시 심벌서 취네. 당가 취다다 치 임박이 취. 나는 냠이 감보바. 다보소나브르치. 콩근제 야주거니. 다 람초르 진청아시. 어때 마시게 요리시.
So the subject matter we'll be looking at is A Precious Garland of the Supreme Path, as composed by the incomparable Gampopa.
아니 다제당 감보바 소나브르치 코랑근제 야주. 띵주드르 치익당 아니 냥거당 아니 당와라 소바데 mambo치요리 아니 카시에게 세드 람초린 친퉁와데 니페차데 마리치 람초린 친퉁와데 뉴뉴제 고르드제 어든지 요리 신다 마리치니 케바카시 든지 요데 바리 때다 제발면도 다 용서 잡발란들라 아니 람초린 친퉁와 인 샤샤세다 어든지 난거 요리지.
Gampopa wrote many treatises, instructions, songs of realization, experiences. And there are some masters who dispute that this precious garland of the Supreme Path is composed by Gampopa Sonam Rinchen, because it is so condensed and abbreviated in style. But for the most part, scholars and masters do accept this as the composition of Gampopa.
어든지 다 되게 된듯이 아니 다 아주 중의지대 된듯이게 짜침보 이제 감보바 코랑게 아니 오반 튼보를 랩스니 까담베게 위시니 세对了 아니 투바세 삼바세 세 메라 아니 그렇게 메라 아니 집집 말아래봐 아니 무슨 지 아니 띵도네 당아 통되잖아요 아니 곰바세네 담보 티베 좀도지 바드삼베 세브라세 타메 아니 곰바 응은도 쥐었네 똑바 응은도 쥐었으니 삼집에 쳐봤겠던데 지위치 못된 레지게다 송자리 그 당아대 드랭 카자이나 양아주 삼탄 드지니 아주 냠데 냠서 린저이저 지투바다 삼바다 곰바 투상 곰서 시지어리 그고 지가와삼보 하자가와삼보 이시대.
Now this main subject that we're looking at is extremely blessed. The high instructions, the instructions of Gampopa, who reached high levels of realization. You know, in the early part of his life, he studied with the Kadam masters, and so he had done a tremendous amount of study, listening to the teachings, contemplating them. Then in the middle part of his life, he met great Master Milarepa and received instructions from him, oral instructions. And in the final part of his life, he spent his time practicing those instructions in meditation. So thus, he really exhibited quite a high level of practice of the teachings in terms of listening, contemplation, and meditation. And for us to have the opportunity to also study these teachings, contemplate them, and meditate on them is also extremely fortunate.
Lama sinanda, Gigin sinanda, Gavishini Kashila yang, Tubayo de Nayang, any Gong Tony. Shira nera kiwa medewa. Any Kashi yang, Jogong Tony, Lame Ngorte. Chip Shine, Lam Tong La Sobakana can't hang a gong tola this you de Nayang. Tubaki Tony, Yung no dang. Any lava the chi. Sanji Jumdin de Gadang, the Jinjo Kebana, the Injula, Mangara Tony. That is called the Kale Kaborindo, the name to Tani Kashila Tubayuna, or the end to Tani Saja Pinchinke, Tuba Maple Gomba, the Laden Dralan Zapanda. Gomba Maple Tuba, the Milong Tongue Chambanda song. The Nichi song Yuri. That is sorry the Masonga Jene, Gampopa de Jena, which is Tula, and to some Nang, gave she mambo chicken doing it, Dangake. The watching a drum mambo J. Yalike. Nikuchi Mela, the little son Gomson, like what the Gong told in Yaminaya. Kansa Chikatola, Keba the Trabasia, the Nisha de Dindeli Kaleka body there is. Indine Jedani Chimbotan, Kedum needing some Jimachapake, the Lamachi Chadiyas.
So it's difficult to find a teacher, a lama, who is fully qualified in this way. You know, there are some teachers who have a tremendous amount of study and learning and can articulate the teachings, but they don't have much experience of them in terms of meditation. While there are others who have good meditative experience, calming their mind and getting into deep meditation, but because they don't have very vast learning, they can't really explain the teachings in ways that don't contradict Buddha and the great masters who have followed Buddha, which is a difficult proposition. And so that's why Sakya Pandita said that trying to meditate without studying is like trying to go rock climbing without hands. Then it's Nipadi.
Gomba Maple Tuba, the Milong Dralan Chamban, Milong Tang and Chambanas, make me Milong Sena, many got long daily Tangani, Tang Chimbochi, then the law there on the Chiri, so you.
Whereas if you have a lot of learning without meditation, then it's like you're sitting at the edge of a precipice with your eyes closed, in a dangerous situation. So Gampopa, on the other hand, was not partial master in this way. He had the full learning of the scriptures as well as the full experience of the meditation, realization of the teachings, especially in that latter part of his life.
Yeah, that didn't it. That music shoot it in the cage in Borite, and it delay Jang and Mundo shoot the Takwara Shilange. Mundo shoot the cage in Beton and 19 ton the Takwara Shilla. And it is.
And as important as this main subject is, as I always say, the preparation for approaching it, preliminary practices are even more important.
Indeed, Johnny. A Chusia de Garisi de Johnny, Chusia de Moma Korang de Modona Tadi, Yuchitayaji. And you look Yuchitawa and Dutch opposite our Maimba. 아니 다나 잉아 주지 땅네 내 갑질라 뭐송 그 돈이 지나 그전 잠보시네 그전 라차보시네 근데 짬 많이 봐 주주 땅서야 돼 오늘 전에 그 주주 가래 땅 것이 셈 땅거요 근데 인도 전에 근데 지가 되는데 셈라 셈베 돈이 아무 추달 대리 값으니 드랭게 추튼데 말한게 담보 야보지니 와드 삼노 땅 타마찌에 바세 아니 타마데니 공고 톨어 처용네 gon 데니 게 추데니 장 다들랑게 줄에 옆에 니몽고 님보질 시트비지 시긴 삼바 든지지 난고리지.
So the practice of Dharma is really meant to bring about change, bring about transformation, and not primarily transformation of our physical actions or our verbal actions, our vocal actions to speak impressively and sweetly and to show off in ways like this is not the primary meaning of what's to be transformed in the practice of Dharma, and that is transformation of our mind. And so even as we sit down and to listen to teachings, let's have this kind of intention, that I will listen to these teachings with that primary intention of transforming my mind, and where I find problems, to use the teachings that I receive as the antidotes and the remedies to those deficiencies, limitations, and faults. In that way, bring about a real transformation of my mind.
근데 전에 다다도 랑경은데 되게 삼노 땅인데 아니 호와제다 세브라가 동할라서 버티 수고듯이 삼노 코네 능용세야 돼 배자친 버린도와 란주는 능용지야 돼 능용세야 돼 간지 고혼도 시도자네 호와제다 세브라가 동할라서 봐 락바다 세브라가 동하라 어디 수고라니 랑등의 철랑네 인 통이번 호와제 세브라가 동하르데 랑등의 랑네 어때를 된도 미바가 로지 님보 자원이는 뭐도 스tam바치게 로주마 많이 바지 심을지야돼 하자게 진보지리야 어디지 란데나 아니 능정지 아니 란데는 능정지 살지라 아니 징기주라 아니 삼바다 닌제디 징이지가 여러와 란주라 아니 능정 자원이는 민hin지이나 징기주라 같이 탑시세는 주랑 그 삼바다 닌제 고나양 제토기요 말이 영생 강의시나 랑 호와당이 성그 동할라 직다 자완이는 매리 아당 호와나는 총야라 태통 짱의 매들 간신도 쪼신다 근데 간사 지기 줄라 인제 간시 제거리 근데 이제 산에 인제대 용수空了的 랑게 줄라 인정지 형네 민정 뒤 진세네 애니 인줄라 인제 지야지 요거도 와
So having contemplated in that way, then turn your mind to development of renunciation. And that's developed by thinking about the general and specific drawbacks, problems, sufferings that there are in samsara. And it's very important to contemplate that pervasiveness of suffering in the nature of samsara, so that you can develop a real wish to be free of it, to become liberated, to get to the point where you just feel there's no true essence to any of this in samsara. I don't want any of it. I want to be free of it. And then once you've developed that kind of renunciation yourself, then turn your mind to developing love and compassion for others, turning that same awareness towards others. Because if you haven't developed renunciation for yourself, how are you going to develop compassion for the sufferings of others? If you haven't developed renunciation for yourself, it means that you're willingly diving into samsara. You have no wish to abandon it. You don't see it as something unpleasant. So how could you then develop, universal compassion for others who are caught up in a situation which you yourself don't even recognize as problematic? Thanks. Rinpoche,
Yeah. Lots of any Adi Ranga Andan to Qua. You see, the one out in the Joa, they ain't my lucky. We should shoot it.
We're going on to now this sixth set of 10.
Shibarsawa Chuchana, she now one trooper dobe, Dimi the Shibasha, Nangasimi, Dami the dobe, Tomba Shibasha, Barjanamdo, Jinjison dobe, lower the Shibasha, Jongulunga, Duzation dobe, Madaba Shibasha, Simjin the Dedo Tamji, Lele Song, Lemde, Malaba Shibasha, Dungar and Jobu Juran dobe, gave Shini the Shibasha, the Jin called Zawan dobe, Shincha, do the Shibasha. Dunzi Chujin Gajin dobe, Sonam Parchi the Shibasha, Parchi Gibjo Kuman dobe, Dragit Lamar Shibasha, Chu Mother Tun Tambar Chutamji, Ranjim Mipan dobe, Kanaya Yabani the Shibasha, Any Shibasa Chuju, knows.
There are the 10 things to be known. Since external appearances are confusion, know them to be unreal. Since the internal mind itself is without a self, know it to be empty. Since the thoughts in between arise conditionally, know them to be adventitious. Since this body and speech composed of the elements are composite, know them to be impermanent. Since all the pleasure and suffering of sentient beings arises from karma, know the results of actions to be unfailing. Since suffering is a cause of renunciation, know it to be a teacher. Since pleasure and comfort are the root of samsara, know craving and attachment to be mara. Since distractions are conditions unconducive to the accumulation of merit, know them to be obstacles. Since obstacles are exhortations for the virtuous, know enemies and obstructors to be your gurus. Since in absolute truth all things are without nature, know everything to be the same. Those are the 10 things to be known.
Lasso. That Jidan Yami Tapu Song Jutsin Redoa, Jutsin Regnana, any Tawa Dang, Gomba Dang, Juba. Mani Chishu Nana, Hona Tawa the Gomba Juba Chasang Yu de Vandachi. Or the Nichindosi.
Now, most of these sets of 10 that Gampopa explains include aspects of the view, meditation, and conduct. That they, in general, they tend to include all three of these aspects of view, meditation, and conduct.
That's all. Pena dan din ani the Pejawa ina. Din ani Angbo Nipa Sumba de Lawa Leja. Lawa Leja.
In this particular case, the first 3 lines deal with view. They present the view.
Any Yibadang, Tubadang, but Yibade, any Gombalaja.
Then we could say that the 4th one presents meditation.
Any Yibade Gombalaja, do any Ngaba, Tuba, the Dumba, the Jiba, Guba, Ngani, Ngato, Dunji, Gote, the party, any Jubalaja.
Then the 5th through the 9th deal with conduct.
Any young Tamak Jubate, Yanja Tawalaja. A Kanta Tambo Nipa Sumba, the Jubate Tawalaja. Any Jibade Gombalaja. Any ngaba trupa dumba jipa gobade, any jubala jana, or the chirijas. That arena and do she practice some of Tawaina, Tagum chusum de. Sometimes took the one that chiri, doctor, Samatu don waina, Tavanana shojik, Gombanana shojik, Jubanana shojik, Yodewa, or the chichadisha.
And then the last one, again, deals with view. So in this particular set of 10, first 3 and the last deal with view. The 4th deals with meditation, and the 5th through the 9th deals with conduct. And so in this way, if you check, examine each of these sets of 10, you can find these 3 aspects. They're not always in order, but in general, you can find all 3 of these.
Take see now one trooper to be dimmed shipper sauce at the gay. Kartangi Churana Chitang in Banjorso Samba,
No,
Imet. Jujorsa in Ba. Oh, that tea nani, Chutu Troops in Totela, Jasela in Subdumak Nani, Carisondo City, that in Draori, that tea long the Martama in Atila is a sad Hakosari. The Carison City, Jetan no under the Rangasim, Sini do the trip and Tadanta. The niche in the Junzin Simana, Hila message Jasela in Sonyuri. That day down, dig Tambotini, Chipachang that charmed.
So with regard to that first line, since external appearances are confusion, know them to be unreal. I have added a note regarding this from the 37 practices of the Bodhisattvas, which goes, whatever appears is your own mind, and mind is forever free of fantasized extremes. Knowing this, not reifying subjective mind and its objects, is the practice of Bodhisattvas. So this verse from the 37 practices of the Bodhisattvas is saying the same thing as the first line here in this set of 10.
Adege Tambote and Shishua in a scene Nawa Sungri, scene Nawa the Dangarang to make you the zone, now you the dra, now you the tre. So look here, this scene Nawa de Nam, triple and worries, tripping already, so yuri. Tripping the wall in the Zane, any Korang Tambote, tripping all, single all the Pachaka one day, Trisumajiri Mato. Your Churangan Toa Naji, your Ansimba, Churanga Megan Toa Naji, Churanga Amchoko Goa Naji, Parjola, and a Ransin to trip deva, Dimbe trip deva. All Tindichi you maris, Naranzi make a Goata Yamde, Megan Toa Yamde, Amchoko Goata Yamde, Parjoni Yurte, Koranga Dunga Tony, Ransin to trip deva Naji. What's it party Nangadoa? Party now a 9 day, you Koranga Tolate, you maris. See, now I didn't trip on dog say at the Jimchi tell Shaggy, and trip on dog way, they made the Shibasa.
So when we speak of external appearances, we're talking about visual forms, colors, and shapes that appear to the eyes, and sounds that appear to the ears, smells to the nose, tastes to the tongue, touches to the body, things that appear to us as external objects, in fact, are the results of propensities and seeds in our own mind for projecting those objects. And otherwise, as something that actually exists completely separate from our mind, as independently or inherently existent, the way the objects appear to us. And in fact, they do appear to us as if they do have their own independent or inherent existence separate from our mind, when in fact they are arising out of imprints and propensities from within our own mind. So that appearance that they have of existing totally separate from our own mind, with their own independent or inherent identity, is mistaken. It's not It's not real. So this is the sense of what's meant here by saying that these external appearances are not real. They don't actually exist in the way that they appear to us to exist.
단디나니 출시야 된 거랑 출은 주줄래지잖니 세진게 주줄래바당 낭게 진게 주줄래바 레진이 거도 낭게 진게 주줄래도 라르진게 맥라 애니 미줄라 소바도 들라 나와라 소바당 애니 짜만자 안도리 그 나와라 소바다 다시 잡고 나와다 어떤지 찍다 아니 락버드 니나니 출세야 돼 마치 남자 준데 주메 ペ제세야 돼 주마스 바바 추르다 몰람로다 띵다베 주세 추나 데다 다시 와 깐마라르 만메다 주마스 바 추르다 몰람로다 띵다베 주세 추나 데다 다시야 디 주메 ペ제게 난신증아랑 촐라 난게 요리시 베나가랑주 어떤 여름에서 낭대와 된 가랑 중문에 랑치도 접하지 나거든 산지에 주랑을 몰람 침보지도 몰람 충중지 니요리시 신든한게 말한주 다다 신든한게 내가데 몰람 침보지당 당선 그 몰람데 디진게 박차가 왕그 센지 그 몰람 충중지 말한주 코블레가 용수 쪽 몰람니 그 나는 로데게 요리시 영어 말 몰람이 송요리
So when we talk about confusion, the word here, trupa, which means mistaken or deceptive, there can be different causes for deceptive perceptions and deceptive appearances, internal and external. Internal causes of deception can be when there's a defect in our vision, for instance, if we have jaundice and we see white things as yellow, or we have cataracts and we see falling hairs, in front of our eyes. These are deceptive appearances based on inner conditions. And then there are just other kinds of deceptions that arise from external conditions. But here, we're primarily thinking about how things appear to us and we perceive them in deceptive ways. Rinpoche quoted this one verse about the nature of composite things, stars, blurred vision, butter lamps, illusion, dew and bubbles, dreams, lightning and clouds, thus view composite things. So these are examples of how to perceive impermanent, compounded phenomena, that they're like dreams, that they're like illusions, so on, that they're deceptive in these ways. Milam before lagari sumbe.
산지에 가서라 나중에 직딩 그 사완도도 주선데 몰람니나는 로건도 송요리시 몰람 침보지도 몰람 충충지 신든한 게 다들 내가 된가랑주 내가 된 몰람 침보지게 몰람 충충데 나공추랑은 몰람지 땅지데 몰람 충충세인데 다든디 몰람데 그 바차데 나공 몰람데라 근데시네다 나랑주 내가 사와 참아데 몰람니 그 나는 로건도 그래서
So Buddha, in fact, said that all of our experiences can be included within two types of dreams. One, the dreams that we have at night, which are kind of like a little dream. And depending upon what happened, the day before, what kind of imprints we have in our mind, and these may influence, the dream appearances that we have that night. Whereas our whole life is the big dream. The big dream that's arising from propensities and imprints that we're bringing from, the previous life, but that in its nature, it's very similar to that dream that we have at night, where those objects, those things that we see in our waking life, are, in a certain sense, no different than the things that we see in a dream.
That's all. Any new batela, Nangasim, Damin dope, Tombarshiba Sasi. At the end of the day, say you're in a pabatang. Now you're in a papas in Shaki or Tavakas, that is Shaki. Ambo yurtin a pub, any yurtin in a pot. That the rich yurte, you may pay jeter. No, Tony, in a pub, Malam Naji Chaswa. That same to any university now, young did on any batela. Nang same to young, Bami is only.
So once we've settled that external appearances are deceptive, and in these 8 types of ways that were mentioned, maybe we can add these to the notes from the session today. Then we can turn our mind to examining the nature of the mind itself and understanding how mind itself also is selfless.
Nang Simi Sintini Jang, Bami the Dope Tombashibasas. Tapena Aranchuina, Chuja Danjin, the Kazak Danjin, Ni quality in Yoruba. Hindutane, the nature Chuka Danjin, the Kazak Danjin Ide, in the Paguaina, any Chuja Damik Tawa Dang, Kazak Damik Tawa Nito.
So to understand this, we need to settle the nature of 2 types of selflessness: the selflessness of living beings, and as well as the selflessness of other phenomena.
Pena, Tangaranchu Mechike, Nga Siachike, Singela Nga Siachi. A single Tony Nga Siachi, the Lichi Saman Kokodoa, Nga Yu Sambachik, Nga Yin Saba, Ngande Yin Sambachik, Saman Kokodoa. Tatea young, let us see Yurtina Papa Naji, Nga Siate Kawalando. Nga Siate Simons of Tsukuyuri, Simsiate Nga Yam the Dino. At the Nichi Salmon Cordu, Nga Kawalan Doxi, the Nangatoni Chokana, this Salmon Downdu, Churangun got in Ari the way, Lakwat in Ari in the way, Subok Dugus hot in Ari in the way, Gamba Ari in the way, Lapang Ari in the way, Sisha Waina, Nga Sinikaja Shiki Marawatila, Korang Lapata Gamba the real main Yuri. The Yin around so can now the capsule. Nga rangi the trip de vanaji, tata say yote rangi the nang de vanaji, around nga si she de tane, nga rangi the trip de vanaji, nga dimbe trip de vanaji. All the nichi nang yuri is te ote kutabote soda.
So to begin with, let's think about the thought I, me. You know, when we think I am, I exist, or I am here. When we then search for that self, for the I, we check our body. You know, is my body I, me? Are my shoulders me, or any part of this upper part of my body me, or the lower part of my body, or my legs me? And when we do that, we can't find something, you know, that is me. All those different parts of our body, they have their own individual names. Like this is my hand, this is the leg, this is not I, you know, it's not me. Lolo singasun tseche tsani dene niege mindu.
Niega mares.
Niege mares.
Nete carisheso.
So in the same way that we examine these external phenomena, we examine this self, you know, that seems to be so independent, so standing on its own.
Let us hear wa. Ngaran so can now caps 나다 싱의보 나다 혈로 책담보的希望那些싱의보 통화的냠도 열 코란의 접대와 나지 그 사람 거거든 이 나지 nga se de chane nga ra yin de trup de wa na yin chi nga dimbe trup de wa na yin chi.
So just as those external objects, they seem to have this concrete, inherent independent existence outside, our mind on the inside has the same sense of something that feels very concrete, findable.
근데 인도 chane kote ra yin de trup yu ma re ra yin de trup yu ma re sak yu re.
But in fact, it's not inherently existent. It doesn't exist with its own self nature.
Ta te ni de la pe na ta ta jie gom si li kap se ma cho tim de la tim de number sum sin de xie ge wa ti ni de la dra do ne te chi xie de ya bo do pe na 다들 양시에는 못 차도 살 다 강다대 다들 야욕이 다들 시에는 배자 치부 쳐서 배당만 내 실험님 보시에 값수 실험님 자는 데 값수 템들 뒤서 거대 지 간데신 차크 유미도 매弄我了 뒤서 걸만 보시에 와 다들 시에는 못 쳐서 아니 강다장 당에 대 치코라는 만데 시자도 대 야욕이 어떤 듯이
Okay, so in examining how things are lack inherent existence, it's very helpful to examine their interdependence. But this is something that I spoke about in a lot of detail during our Heart Sutra teachings, and if we went into it now, it would get to be very wordy. So I'm not going to give word by word explanation here. But if you remember, there was three levels, three types of interdependence that were indicative of phenomena being selfless.
아니 바르jet남도 나선바텔라인다 바르jet남도 지신도베 러버드시 바르사시 셔낭 바르시네 바르시아텔라 셈리 네번남도 세야지 난데나니지 셈리 로스지 번남도 요대완다지 네나니 바르송데 자네 송당텔라 남보 나와시 데니 셈시 아니 남도 세야다지 어든지 과 장고도 바지 남도데 진지순도 배 로버드 시바사시 다데 가레 송고 리세디 자네 생그 낭니 남도도 연거요리시 셈데야데 나랑조 예 되만에 사신을 바 시빈 신이스 셰게요리 사르케 셈데라 남보니바데 델렌데 셰다 선바데라 사르케 셈그 낭데니 메게베 셈 남도그 셈데라 아니 남도시
Notice. Okay, with the third line, we have since the thoughts in between arise conditionally, know them to be adventitious. So we talked in the first line about external objects, in the second line about the internal mind itself, and now we're talking about thoughts as if they're someplace in between. Okay, as if they're a third entity here, but just speaking of them in that manner, that forever we've had different kinds of thoughts, delusions, arise in our mind.
Pena semseade terija tadandi dani nang sem dami de dopasieti semseade nibatela nang sem dami siati semde sarchin rikpa shipen sinisia sarek sem samala yudeva tela is sambate parjin namto seade dige sarchin rikpa ti ngangteni tripo wange ani namto yongatela ani trichi trishi sona hakono sarwa.
And that that defining characteristic of the internal mind is called clarity and cognition, Salshing Rigpa in Tibetan. And so that's talking about the very nature of the mind, being clear, being clarity, clear light and cognition. And so the thoughts that arise out of it are cases of the mind being deceived about its own nature. That the thoughts arising as if there's something that's in between, that's not of the nature of this clear cognizing mind, but arising in a manner that's deceptive, that's nature of discursive thoughts and delusions.
Tendendu zane parje namdo de jin jisendu besina hajang lamsang korang jin chunju jilan chena any lamsang jin wa jin dosi.
And these thoughts that arise in the mind are very fleeting, transitory. They can shift at a moment's notice with some slight difference of condition gives rise to them changing. So they're very subject to changing conditions.
Ate tendendu zane ko lower wa yin bachi, tate lower di yin bachi, ko ranguni matter bachi, namdo seya chik ta, same seya chik ranguni matter bachi, lower di yin bachi kori songre isi.
So this shows that they are adventitious. They're fleeting. They're transitory. So they are not. They don't exist in and of themselves. In which case they would be, firm and lasting. They don't exist in that way. So therefore they are temporary and fleeting, and they can be removed.
Oh yeah, any jiba de jungu lunga duze to be madaba shibarsa. That is called le laurin doa. Nishidan de shijago samari, Maranzo, that in Junga yig de belonga. Jung seateke, Jung ver seateke, Maranzu zubo de saikam. Any cha de chui kam. Drew de may come. Walk de longa come. Any nang buga de namka come. The teaching in the Zane. Jungwa yi de belunga de Ludanga ni the Sabata Jibas in Juvandoya yote. Then the Zeris, and the Zeyote Matabaris.
Next line, since this body and speech composed of the elements are composite, know them to be impermanent. This is pretty clear. We don't need to give a lot of explanation. The elements composing our body, the solid, the flesh and bone of our body is reflective of the element earth, the earth element, our blood of the water element, the heat of our body of the fire element, and the movement of the energies in our body of the wind element, and then the spaces inside our body reflective of the space element. Also, Jungwanga.
Pugak Sigurda, Pugak.
They should be good saying.
Zubu Nancha, Nanga Tongba Tang Yorwa, the Sukote any Nanka Ranjis.
They are doing a good saying.
Yeah. Then they do.
Really, so since these are composite, that they're compounded phenomena. They come together from causes and conditions, and therefore they're fleeting, they're transitory, impermanent. Yes.
Oh yeah.
Usually about
Yeah. That is called Lelawari. Any Simji Dedo Tamji Lele Junge, Le Jim de Malabashi Prasas. That they are Lelawari doa. Tadangaran Simji Deva the Dohar Yonso Joba. Tadangaran Sola Sachi Deva Sachi Dohar. Hang you ba. The Tama de. Any Huma Ju pass home and Revet Soyong. Tadangaran Sola Dohar Yu Devate. Huma Ju. Then me give a Jew. Dikbala so but the Nichi Latine Tata Dohar Yu Deva Chitang. Tata Kanza Sulayang, the Deva Yubate, any Jew, any give out a Deva Lasso but the Nichi Tina Tata Yong Deva. And Ditane, any legend at the Malawa. Or she got you somebody.
Since all the pleasure and suffering of sentient beings arises from karma, know the results of actions to be unfailing. So this is quite straightforward here. in that, all of the experiences that we and others have, if they are pleasant, they are the results of some positive karma, some positive action that we've created in the past. And if they're suffering, then it's the result of some harmful action we have created in the past. Even in whatever type of happiness it is, whether it's contaminated happiness or pure happiness, it's always the result of some positive karma, and suffering always the result of some negative karma. So in this sense, karma is infallible. It doesn't fail to produce its results.
Lujitoni soji bada mazimba limba mazangwa chiba sum ngagatoni jun chama sikso ngancha ishi yeji goni eni namsenda nusenda lokta di jote eni tatanga chi dojun sene ta tila dapo dane eni megewa ju sola masongwa chi ta ranga lo de go de majiwa sene ngarang ha goyo de zani dambo senla dapo jab songwa ina any same tea one game, ni chu ko mage wa to pa la so ba ka an zani any look at you ba da nga ke cha xia la so ba de ra ji ge wa la chan ko yor wa.
Yes. So if we want to have a precious human life like we have now, again in the future, it's quite indispensable that we practice pure ethical discipline and abandon the 10 non-virtues of killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct with our body, lying, slandering, abusive speech, and idle use of speech with our speech, and then malice, covetousness, and distorted views with our mind. As a summary of negative actions, we need to really abandon these 10 in order to again find precious human life. So if we take control of our own mind, watch our own mind, direct our own mind in positive directions, then our actions of speech and our body will automatically or naturally follow suit.
Any trubadeke dungar nimjo ko juran to pe give shinji de shibrasas.
Since suffering is a cause of renunciation, know it to be a teacher.
Lasu dungar siate chetang rangsu ta tata sa ta karese gore chi dungar ji dungar jurbe dungar chaban de ji dungar ta rangsu tata dungar ji ngunjin se yora simchi tamche ko dungar ngunjin si sate ani dungar ji dungar tele mato ani dungar jimba ta so ngunjin si thugi yo marda saji chomdin de ke chura dungar te chura ngulin shi gore is chura hako gore is de pansa mari si dungar shipar sa song do mato dungar pangwar sa song ma do wa deji nani dungar shipar sa si ta dungar kang yu bu ju ti dungar ka chawa de kan yu ngu yu samo tawa ina ani chaban du ji ji dungar se ya de yu ngu yu re ta ngarang tu simchi mangbo chi ta jacha nani pachi jacha jachu gupchu pachi ka ta chaban du ji ji dungar se ya de ani hako yu mari o tindi indu tsani di naniya dungar shipar saa se dungar se ya den di kapsu dungar te tata ngarang su simchi tamche ke pansa ke dungar ji dungar o telang sungu doa.
So we think about suffering, where there's actually, there's 3 kinds of suffering that Buddha talks about: suffering of pain, suffering of change, and pervasive suffering of karmic conditioning. And we pretty much only recognize suffering of suffering as, or the suffering of pain as suffering. We don't recognize the suffering of change as suffering, or suffering of karmic pervasive conditioning as suffering. And we tend to think of it as something we want to get rid of, but Buddha did not speak of it in that way in the context of the Four Noble Truths. When he spoke of the first noble truth, he said, recognize suffering. He didn't say abandon suffering. It wasn't until he got to the second, the causes of suffering, that he spoke about abandoning the causes of suffering. But in terms of suffering, he said, recognize it, look at it, see it for what it is, recognize it in its full extent in all of these three levels, but particularly just acknowledge, that we have suffering and look at it. Yes.
Taten di kapsu dunghar siate, tatang ngarang zu dunghar ji dunghar tela song yuri. Ti dunghar ji dunghar tatang nga zu nyong yi ba dunghar te, saki ka dunghar te, eni dukcha mare isi. Tela pe masi yapo re song den, dina ne kadambe gemi shini nambe dunghar panga yo mare, dunghar tane na ka yorwa. Tendi indu tsane, dunghar ngimjong ku julan roka yuri isi. Dunghar yin minji chizi ku julan roka yuri isi. Dungar churang ka ranting la nginjong rang ju la nginjong chi ya de xin chi ju la ni chi ya ni ka la pin ta ko yo si de de zan ne ka za ju ju ka chi chi chu la de tang yo de la long ding pang na ju ju ka na ne yin ya dungar yong de ne jo ye zhe ba se ba si ko ba la ni ji ji de gen ze xie ge la ga si ne dungar ka yong de de chi chu ma bo so song do ko la ju wa ji ya dang rang ju la ni nga jar dang 다 가르쳐 그 킹릭 나서 봐. 근데 세바다. 아니 yin 심진 고와라. 봐. 근데 그 심진 담제라. 닌지지야다. 아니 드빠는 셈바다. 아니 개와라 가와. 정부 용딩 아타마도와. 가나 yin 윤조가 나니 동할 미페 민조 미소유리. 왜나 집주 밀라레파 당. 아니 다 나지 코랑 그 다다 나란전 치 이밖에 아니 임주 좀바보. 아니 냐미 다보 소남 르치 Gampopa de na yang tanga mangpo ching che ne kanga de ki chin la ti ne ani lamsang lower de ni ning jong chi ani tambe chu de zun de se an din ni sumpa na hi de palan jeng ge wa la gawa la so pa chama de dunga ke chin la ti ne yong sun ju ri do wa ga na ji san ji chom din de yang ji ga nan chi dunga ke na de li sim chi de chi zik ne zigwa cham ji ko ran tin la nyong yu ma ri de nyongwa tsamji, thongwa tsamji, zikpa tsamji ni ta maung pala ngalan dindawa chike dunga nyonggarwa ta tele cha tata nini dungar tele thali thashi chike zogun dogong ne tende chik ta mambo chi dungar ki chin la tine ani sanji ji kompang top sungsa ta tende chi chadi yorwa si
Since suffering is the cause of renunciation, know it to be a teacher. So in this context, we're primarily thinking of the suffering of suffering, or suffering of pain, which we're most obviously aware of. That's what's being referred to here. And not as something to be gotten rid of, but something to really contemplate and to be with, and to even know as a teacher, as a virtuous spiritual guide. Because there are many positive qualities that can come from being aware of suffering. And as I added some notes for this session from Shantadeva's Guide to the Bodhisattva Conduct, where he said, furthermore, positive qualities of suffering include sadness, dispelling puffed up arrogance, compassion developing for beings caught in samsara, harmful deeds being shunned, and positive ones enjoyed. So in this way, we see that by contemplating sufferings, we can develop renunciation, true wish for liberation for ourselves, as well as then compassion, concern for others. And as Shantadeva in this verse points out, there are many benefits of suffering, such as then also shunning negative deeds and enjoying positive ones. Rinpoche, puyigla norto chikduga gawa la gela ga gogara. Then also,
Dorji Pengi Yang.
Kyang Yanka Champo Yore.
Oh, Jun Kawando.
That was it. And then also in Bodhisattva, Guide to Bodhisattva Conduct, Shantideva also said, in the absence of suffering, there is no renunciation. And without renunciation, the entire door, as Rinpoche mentioned last time, of Dharma is closed to us. So without suffering, the door of Dharma would be closed to us. We wouldn't be able to develop renunciation. Notice.
Milarepa. Gampopa Sanji to support Tama and Yongi.
And if we look at the lives of Milarepa and Gampopa, we see how the sufferings that they encountered enabled them to very quickly develop renunciation. And in the case of Buddha himself, he didn't even experience it for himself, but just upon seeing the suffering that beings were subject to, he developed renunciation and determination to discover a way to find liberation from those sufferings. So there's many benefits to suffering that should be understood, not immediately eliminated.
That's all. And it Dumbate, the Chin cover Zawan to Peshincha do the Shibarsas. They no soap and melon to shit out on a Pekale Caporita.
So pleasure and comfort are the root of samsara, no craving and attachment to be Mara. So this is something that's very difficult for me to explain to Westerners.
Particularly California people, okay, that is the problem. Here is the 7, they can call it Zawan to Peshincha do the Shibarsas. The Mambo chick, the Chisia de Atangarang to Yong Yimbake, Jura Dongar. Sanjik de Dongar is some way. The Narang to Sausage Mola, Musuran, Simpa Chickate. Oh, but the currency in the Dongar in Songoyunaya. Nancy Chipot, the chicken nangne, Naga Topo Michala, Sokala Bay, Chibotang, Gonda Kalape, Shimbo Song, Chang Aran Tong, any a ye tang, then red really cheese Mazon watching other songs, that the currency in the Donga in Secondasa. A mambo chicken patchet is some cigarettes.
So many people, may very well think, what are you talking about, suffering? I have good friends, go to the beach, we have great food, have such a good time, we sing and dance. There's nothing about this that's suffering.
And then, Sanji Jumdin Tila Dine, any Marangso, Tabatunia law Machiwake, Tabatunia law, Archi Chishute, Ata Tanang Devare, Nathan Gonghorn. And now Chuju, check Devan Gonghordeade. But they pay Ninga Chimboris. At the Legend Gonghor Deva in a Mount Bachurang, Tarpa Asia, the Tawan in the top to Gumaris, Tarpa Asia.
So Buddha said that the biggest obstacle to our liberation is these very superficial little pleasures that distract us, that keep us from developing a wish for liberation. And if we continue that way in the future, we won't even have the opportunity to hear about liberation.
Conduciva Nanjing, I should Dungarciatela, Jura Dongarchitan, Chaban de Ziji Dongartang, Dungarji Dongar Sum, Hey, what a tambo hako at the kitchen borisha. Tatang around to Dechi in a gong hordesate, Nekap Tanang Devachi Reves in the Rite, Tartuk Deva Mahimpa Hakone, Tatelang Gong Hawaii, Nyamo Chakungupa Nanji, Lambochin Damden Suanaji. Nekap chick they were chung chung chick any. She was dingy jiwa tinje ani dechi de la wa o tende chi ka nga chu pe ne nya da che na thabi se ne cha chu ke ze de le sin je de se tende se ne ni cha chu de choi na le yo ne ani nya de ning ji de la khala nok sam ti dechi chung chung de la cha chu de thong ko yo ma wa di khala de la sam mo ta ndi si yong de cha ne ni cha chu ke ngai ngari da da ngarang chu dechi de nya cha chung gu ba na yin ge ani 나 풍첩 치슈 그 흡지 치슈게 농하게 이제 치슈데 드니 용거 요리 있었나 아데 소거 요리
But so important that we understand these three levels of suffering: suffering of change, and the pervasive suffering of karmic conditioning. Because this suffering of change is actually what we experience as happiness. And it's actually a very fleeting, changeable, contaminated happiness. It's really just a facsimile of happiness, not true happiness. And so it's a very slight experience of pleasure, if that, relief from suffering. And it's like we're, a fish caught on a hook, or an elephant that's tied to a stake. The fish sees that little bit of bait on the hook, thinks it's food, grabs for it and loses its life. So in a similar way, we grasp for these very fleeting, superficial facsimiles of happiness, but it brings, great ruin to us. We're continuing to be trapped in samsara.
아니 지바데 근든지 추진 가진도 베소나 파치데 시버사스 다 추드버 갑스 아니 지시 파치당 든즈스나 남행스기 요리다 레로다 남행 라소바다 옹에 사니 세는 데거리 다와 지마 세는 데거리 다당에 레가 대시 아니 마음바르 추시는 데거리 삼바치기 출래 레로다 스조르게 아니 든지 추데 추제 파치리시 내 추제 파치인데 자네 아니 저랑 그 소남당 이시지가 나니 소남과 파치라 든지 요거 요리 소말이 그때 레라오리도
Since distractions are conditions unconducive to the accumulation of merit, know them to be obstacles. This is easy to understand. Distractions from practice, or postponing practice, thinking, I can do this, next year, next month, or I'll finish this work first, and then I'll do this. And these kinds of factors will prevent us from gathering those accumulations of merit and wisdom, and thus are obstacles.
Any gubade ke parche give you commando but dagui lama shibarsas. That young any chumune get you aboji drum that the shili capsu, any chu sabsana do jang sabsong yuri. Chukate sena yang any de la duke parche de manga yuris. All the day to Tanya did the parche lasso, but in the song Swaina, they give you a kumal and rock or somebody. Parche the dagui lasso, but any lamungola dark.
Since obstacles are exhortations for the virtuous, know enemies and obstructors to be your gurus. One thing to know is that as your practice progresses and deepens and becomes more profound, more obstacles will arise. It's a sign of your practice becoming more profound. And when that happens, recognize them as in the same way as beneficial factors to recognize as your spiritual guides.
Since
in absolute truth all things are without nature, know everything to be the same.
남자주도 취시를 값어. 된다는 거라. 취탐지 얘네 맞아 봐. 얘네 얘 두만에. 라힘이 봐. 라친도 뚜빠미 봐. 나랑도 다단 통화다 투발라서 봐도 군족고 오라 통거 이들 자네 工作我让通的，我就让心把心通过有的。当把爷呢可能去他们去，让心的马着吧，让心的马着吧。肯定就在你对了，你200年的长嘛了，当香个通呢，我的结果的意思。
So in practice of Dharma, we talk about two natures, relative nature and absolute or ultimate nature of things. And whereas in their ultimate nature, things have forever lacked true existence or inherent existence or true self-nature, the things that we perceive are in the realm of relative nature of things. And yet our ignorance perceives them as ultimate or concrete. So knowing that in fact in their ultimate nature things are selfless, then we can develop equanimity and attitude that is equal towards everything.
Yeah, that
So today we'll leave it here. And I will take some questions today. If anyone has questions about, the instructions today or last time.
Yeah.
I have a question, if I may. Thank you so much, Rinpoche. Thank you so much, Jampa. As you were talking about the two types of selflessness of living beings of all phenomenon, you briefly mentioned the three types of interdependence. And without going fully into detail, but just hearing that, if I could have the list of the three types of interdependence, I'll go back to our notes from the Heart Sutra retreat and look it up. But I would love to include here the list of the three types of interdependence. Thank you.
And Rinpoche, Tenja Namba Sunde so Ning
Last one. Okay. Today, Jatan Jiba go nang Recho Chilang email the Tanyons. Shirab Nimbo and Arkan in the Rachi theory. That dinner and the Jihi Jiba theory.
So I'll send you something, Rachel, in which I've explained this pretty extensively.
The Heart Sutra.
Notes from the Heart Sutra.
In the train and Dorduchi Shagins,
But just to honor your request, I'll mention them briefly now.
Tambo the Nibatilla, Tambo the Niba Sumbatilla, Tatilan the Rachimoto, Tambo the Niba Sumbatilla, saying now a tribando but they made the Shibasa. Nangasimi, Damid of Tomba Shibasa, Pajanam to Tin Chisen of lower the Shibasa, Seatilla. Other than to Tim Jung Seatilla, Tim Jung, what to Tawatin and baby cups, Yogon Chik Tang, Chiegon Chik, Nigatoni, Tawatin and baby.
When we settle the meaning of interdependence, we do it by utilizing both analytical meditation and placement meditation.
Any Jiegon got on the Tawatin and Bam the Kaus, Tin Jung, Rotang the Shigores.
So to determine its meaning through analytical meditation, we need to understand something about that meaning.
Tin Jung. Tin Jung got said.
Interdependent origination.
And then that de la Tin Jung de la any Chashila team with Tim Jung. Eugene team with Tim Jung. Mingjang Tayu Zam the team with Tim Jung. Tim Jung number Sumir, Karak Tony.
Okay, so in terms of gross to subtle levels of interdependent origination, there is dependence upon parts, a whole being dependent upon its parts. Then there is dependence, results being dependent upon their causes. And then there's the dependence of things upon their names, upon their imputation of a label upon them, the mere labeling of them. So there's differences of subtlety in these three levels, three types of interdependence. Now to speak of the gross of these, the interdependence of cause and effect, effects being dependent upon their causes, this is quite obvious, easy for us to see and understand. When yoga drag jolatine, drag nugachi, drag sawon jungo yore, neg jolatine, neg nugachi, neg sawon jungo yore. Jo ringtone latine, and in driver ringtone jungo yore, telegumdating jonsaki, and order chihida. So in terms of this level of interdependence, when you plant a rice seed, you get a rice sprout and then a rice plant. You plant a barley seed, you get a barley seed, then a barley plant. And so in this type of interdependence of cause and effect, you get results that are of a similar type to their cause. Yeah. Any that chashik ni ba the chashik timjong. Chashik timjong se ade when a tusa tunjok tony. Tusa tunjok tony, nimola tunen simo. Now la tunen mumba. Rimbo la tune tunge, Chimbo la tune chung chung. And in terms of things being dependent upon their parts, we can also think of this in terms of relativity, that day is posited relative to night, darkness and relative to light. Length relative to shortness, and so on. Big relative to small. Big relative to small. Very good, Rinpoche. Yeah, yellow small, yellow relative to the black. You yellow, I am black. By the way. Oh, the chicken correct is a tunjola share the tane, and it I can't say the chick. Tin up with him young. See, Chashila tin with him young and all the chick chardy. So in this way, we get the positing of things relative to other factors. And it tinny pass you pass on in a Chashila tin with him young say Attila, pass on in a young dodgy chiglatine, dodge the docus in the tane, pen and ag zupo de la page along. Zupo de la pe la waina. Zupo se de tane, ding goda kamba yuji tsama de la, ni zupo se ne meng de tak yuri. Tehung omala, zupo kawale yuri se de, go, kamba, lakpa, zumo, da re, ke chala tana baba tsunchu la meng re, ho cha de yurwa. Dene de tane chashele tim bitim yonsi. So now again, in terms of interdependence, or depending upon its parts, we take our body, for instance. We call this a body. This collection of body parts. We call it a body. But if we search through it, the head, the shoulders, the arms, for where is this actual body to be found, we find that it's a label that's given upon this collection, so it's dependent upon the parts. What is it? That these kale kashu tadi jumde tim jong te tis le laoji. Chashek tim jong te tis tindi yang de chane. The chip in you tim jong tim jong dan chashek tim jong te so tis any ale kabodi ta kale kashu te kare de shitu chane minjang tayu zamji tim jong si.
Mingde yakpa zamji tingyong, mingjang tayu zamji tingyong siyate. Tate kale kashu ngoma tere.
So dependence upon cause and effect, effects being dependent upon their causes, is the grossest level, easiest for us to understand. Things being dependent upon their parts or their facets, this gets to a subtler level, not quite as easy to understand. And then this third level of dependence upon name is the most subtle, most difficult to understand. That things exist merely through being labeled. They're completely dependent upon the name that they're given for their existence.
Nga siyachidwa, nga siyachide, nga kawala yorishine, taki shimu siyana zangni manye wada chi chedala longdo li kingi nga. Nga magawa ina yang pakpan thala longso wada chi, tak chi nikin tak kanong chi la, gaza de ga chiwa ina chintala longdo li kingi nga. Gaza de magawa ina, any tea thing ni leta nyumong mambo chi magewa saandu chane, any akaracha toni to mathabi ki yang kyuncha laandu chane, ta tila hama tila mingde ya zamji digiri isi. Nga siyate mingke pa yapa zane mato tu rangi ni trupa nga siyate churanga tolo yo mare isi. Ele pinchu kago mare isi. Ele nyamja siyendu si gomja du chane, nga rangi ni trupa mendo sambache ke minchang on sang ke miga ti ngole ya na, garang kan digi yori so. Mingke ta zam, dai ta zam ni mato tu rangi korang ni trupa chi mendo saba. Marang chu nani kapsu tu rangi ni trupa chi nang digi yorwa. Dindrup te kake yori mato nga korang kake yomare. Non-true kare zoko do siti non-true dimbe trupa tin. Nga chu dindrup lan ziyin du chane, dindrup te ka zang ke ini digi yori isi. Dindrup te ka thumna digi yori soko yori.
So when we think I, me, and we search for it, on the what we don't find that self, the I that we're searching for, then there could be a tendency to drift towards nihilism, where we think that, oh, there's nothing. No. And on the other hand, if we just accept the way the self and things appear as to be true, as if they really do have the inherent true existence that they appear to have, then we'll be reactive, we'll develop delusions, we'll remain trapped in samsara, in the suffering of samsara. So that's not a solution either. And so what we need to do upon realizing that self can't be found, we need to just be satisfied with it's only a name. There's only a name there, and to leave it at that. We don't need to give up that name, the mere labeling of a name, but at the same time that we realize that self that is labeled is not to be found, it is not inherently existent, and we can realize that it's just dependent upon being labeled, and that is considered to be the correct understanding, and which we can then proceed without falling into the extreme of nihilism or eternalism.
Wasu kanga le kale thukde sina kanga te dindrup kake yori saki ta.
So the problem is not things appearing to us, but in their appearing to be truly existent, and our accepting that and believing that they really are truly existent and grasping them to exist in that way.
Ma korang kake yomari dindrup kake yorwa.
So I, the self, itself is not negated. Only its true existence is negated. Only its inherent existence.
내 가자 내가 그 롱지 가장은이 장이 봐 가장 그 롱들라 야세 진부 시와라 근데다 통투 시바다 데네 각발 사미 데네 동하르 겨르죠 바 딤버 똑바 도사이시 가장 그 롱디나데 추퉁마 그 롱디나한테네 따뜻해 마시 고지치 모르더라 가나지 때로밖에 번나웨 mention 신배 신바 추지 나로 봐송도아 신바세한테 딘진을 거유는 같이 나시한테 랑은이 접대야지 코시한테 랑은이 접대야지 어떤지 지리야.
So we had these quotations from last time that were very applicable here, where Shantideva said, thus seeing, hearing, knowing, these are not to be stopped. That to be stopped is the cause of suffering, which is grasping at the reality of these. And as Tilopa said to Naropa, son, appearances don't trap you, grasping at them does. Stop grasping, Naropa. So when we notice that we're clinging to something as truly existent, as inherently existent, that's what we need to negate, not its mere existence in terms of what is labeled as being there. So let's leave this here today.
Ande zawe lama rinpoche tagi chiguro pime den shula kadin chenpe kone jeson te kuson tuye ngojo tse tu so. Ramjan kyamne omsote ramjan kyamne gyatsu chinla tan denye tenje loa mepe tu kebara chime tseye la so. Tsewa yishin chingchen tengdere po kege chinle ka ken kama kasu donga chazo menga ju ngome suwe lamda nyamdo yende tseka gedere shabde sol kange sansom doje rangkams lekwara tenje longdo dambe chu shiru tusan gombe dude Saden Gambe Chinle Tharchin Sho Bande Lame Nambara Tabala Giji Samya Lota Mikish Chinze Lekora Tungwe Mugu Ki Lame Chinla Semla Juba Sho Kewa Quinto Yanda Lama Tan Jeme Chuge Betan Longchuj Satan Lamke Yunde Razo Nepade Lame Kopan Yoto Sho.
O glorious and precious root Guru, please take seat of lotus at my crown. Caring for me in your great kindness, please grant attainments of body, speech, and mind. Om Swasti, may the blessings of infinite seas of our places of refuge, the force of the two truths, infallible interdependence, and especially the hosts of deities of immortal well-being, now rain down the magnificent splendor of their wisdom and power of longevity. The Lord of the dance of all victors' enlightened activity is Karmapa. Your unquenchable thirst for the inner essence of his traditions, doctrines, of discourses, tantras, great seal, great perfection, and pith instructions, has brought the qualities of signs on the spiritual path, your experience and realization, to their full flowering. May your life be firm. May the wisdom mysteries of your body, speech, and mind be as perfectly firm as a Vajra's own immutable elements. May your gatherings of disciples who study and practice the sacred teachings of scripture and realization by listening, contemplation, and meditation cover the earth. May your activity reach its ultimate consummation. May I never for an instant develop wrong views of the glorious Guru's life and deeds, but with devotion seeing all they do as excellent May the Guru's blessings enter my mind. In all lives, may I never be parted from perfect Gurus, enjoy glory of Dharma, and perfecting qualities of the paths and stages, quickly attain the state of the glorious Guru.
Chirangan Tongudo Samba.
Got it?
Tongudo. You see,
Tongudu.
all Ale, Ngay Chiran to last on Kadi Chona Hakumas.
Ale, insa.
Dajin Sinjin Damji Lo Jusun Dova Sinjin Labdo So Julamdan Dova Sinjin Labdo So Lantaba Sevara Sinjin Labdo So Lantaba Yishi Sinjavara Sinjin Labdo So Daso Namje Jidan Timba Ye Jitara Samba Yipshin Daba Dan Nedogi So Badu Jibe So Onyevara Shivara Sinjin Labdo So Nejimin Santibe Razi Niji Boda da Bernas Simji Medeve Nedagon Jitin Kamson Jovan Maje Simji Ne Bajini Banyu Denele Tawarisho Dovene Namaleba Adun Jovan Me Bai Lasso Nitindi that Rendila any chance of Tonkamado Kawanda last one.
I don't know where you all went. I can't see you anymore here.
Oh no. You can't see us?
Yeah, it's okay.
Oh,
I think my computer.
oh okay.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone.
China, Tujiche,
Jiche Sambala.
Atila
China, Rinpoche.
Atila